Hello and welcome to this webinar, The Imperative to Adapt Technological Disruption's Impact on the Construction Industry. This event is brought to you by Engineering News Record and sponsored by Struxy, powered by Penta Technologies. Hi, I'm Scott Seltz, publisher of ENR, and your moderator for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Please join me in welcoming our presenters, Bill Wagner, President of Penta Technologies and Struxy, and Ryan Hale, Chief Information Officer and Director of Strategic Initiatives at Lithgow Contracting. Bill Wagner is an experienced business and thought leader who is passionate about driving growth by creating great experiences for customers. He has a long track record of successfully applying cutting-edge best practices from the worlds of business, science, marketing, and economics in a way that scales into all companies, both large and small. At Lithgow Contracting, one of the largest commercial concrete construction companies in the U.S., Ryan Hale is responsible for strategy, implementation, and adoption of technology and process improvement initiatives. Through these initiatives, Ryan and his team strive to provide timely and accurate information to stakeholders so they can make informed decisions. Ryan Hale from Lithgow is a Penta Technologies customer. About 2 years ago, Lithgow was looking for a software-based labor productivity solution and didn't like their options from what they saw that was available in the market. That's when Bill and Penta decided to develop Struxy, along with Lithgow, on their job sites, and to pivot to focus on labor productivity in construction. Both Penta and Lithgow are focused on progressive tech for the construction space, which is what has made this partnership work so well for the past few years. Now, before we start today's presentation, please enjoy this brief instructional video on how to use your webinar console.
Welcome to this webinar. Before we begin the presentation, I want to provide you with a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a taskbar with icons. Each icon is assigned to a particular element of today's webinar. Click on the person icon to learn more about today's speakers. Throughout the presentation, you can network with others or submit questions to the speakers in the Q&A and chat box next to the slides. Download resources from the cloud icon. After the webinar is over, please take our survey to tell us how we did. Today's event is being recorded and archived and will be available within 24 hours. For on-demand questions or comments, send us an email by clicking Need Help? Email us. If you experience any technical issues today, please refresh your browser by hitting F5 for PC or Command R for Mac. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's moderator.
Don't forget to submit your questions during the presentation, and later in the program, our presenters will address as many as possible. Today's event is being recorded and archived on enr.com/webinar, so you can share this presentation with your colleagues. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's first presenter, Bill Wagner. Bill?
Thank you, and welcome everybody to the webinar. You'll notice as we get into the content today that I'm going to be the one, when you hear me talking, I've got accent and Ryan's polished Midwestern voice. So as we bounce back and forth, you'll be able to tell us apart a little bit. Today's agenda, as Scott said, I'm going to go first. I'm going to do a little bit more of the broad framing of the issue of technological disruption and its impact on other industries and how we view that as playing out in the construction industry. And then Ryan is going to follow up in the second half of this webinar and give the attendees a little bit of a real world case study of how to actually do something about this issue. So we're going to play a little bit of good cop, bad cop, and I'm going to be the bad cop with all this scary information about technological disruption. Hopefully, if we do our job and we do this really well over the next hour, we're going to be able to give everybody the background and arm you with some simple steps so you could get ahead of this disruption curve when you all go back to work as soon as the webinar is over. It's all well and good for us to talk about these 50,000-foot business issues that are going to impact our industry, but it's really important that we communicate some simple steps so that folks that are attending this webinar feel like they're armed to actually confront these issues and maybe turn what might feel like an existential threat to the market or to your business into a competitive advantage that you could start leveraging to win business and be successful. I've spent a decent chunk of my career in construction technology, but I've spent the majority of my time in other industries. I've worked in e-commerce, I've worked in big technology, I've worked in healthcare. And so I wanted to bring a little bit of the learning from those industries to a construction audience in this webinar. And so I want to start with some framing about the impact of time and the way our timelines or our plans for our businesses are constantly being compressed by these external forces. Some interesting talking points, 60 years ago, the average age of a company in the S&P, 1950, 60 years was the average age of a company in the S&P 500. Last year, the average age was only 20 years, and they're expecting in another 10 years, that average age of a company in the S&P 500 is going to get cut in half. And so if you think about that, that's really impactful for all of our businesses. I've seen all sorts of statistics about the average age of construction companies in North America, and that average probably has a really wide middle of the bell curve. But most of the data that I've seen shows that an average construction company only lasts around 16 years. So it's actually less of a long tenure than S&P 500 member, which is huge billion-dollar companies. The other thing I think is interesting from the big broad world out there, in the last Accenture Disruptability Index, which is a survey that Accenture, which is a big thought leadership consulting company, conducts with business leaders such as yourselves across every industry, 63% of the executives they talk to believe that their company is currently facing some type of massive disruption that they need to be accounting for in their strategic plans. And even more than that, 68% said they expected some new disruption to come down the road and impact their strat plan for their business in the next 3 years. And what Ryan and I are going to talk about is technology as the vector that those disruptions are going to come in on. And some examples from the world of business to consumer businesses that we're all really familiar with. We've all heard the story about how Netflix got rid of Blockbuster. Why did that happen, though? It happened because the delivery of movies shifted to streaming content online. So technology is the reason why Netflix beat Blockbuster. The reason Amazon put Barnes & Noble out of business is because e-commerce platforms came into being for retail. Uber and Lyft are putting cab companies out of business because of proliferation of the gig economy, which only works if everybody has a smartphone in their pocket. YouTube is hurting network television because of cheap cloud storage, the proliferation of smartphones, the ability to stream high-definition content to people. And even things like the rental car industry, upstarts, this company Turo, is sort of a crowdsourced rental car company where I can put my personal vehicle up as a rental car right now because it's not being used to drive me to work every day. And I can actually get into competition with my local enterprise rent-a-car down the road using just my smartphone. And so this is something that we're going to see continue to accelerate and proliferate in the construction industry. And what I'm going to do as we get deeper into this presentation, I'm going to pick apart some of the main things that I think construction leaders need to be accounting for in their strategic plans for their business to be able to turn this from an existential threat into a competitive advantage. Before we do that, though, and before I share some more information, we've got a survey question that we'd like everybody to fill out. How recent was your last major software purchase for your business? And by major software purchase, I mean the type of thing that got the attention of the executive team. And so we're going to give everybody a couple of seconds to fill that out. We'll give it maybe 30 seconds. And the reason why we wanted to tee this question up is to reinforce the concept that when we're talking about the technological disruption of the construction industry, we're not talking about something that's going to happen 5 years from now. We're talking about something that is happening right now. And as I'm talking, and as all of you are clicking in the survey here, we can see how that bar for less than 1 year is taking up a big percentage of the responses to the survey. So, now we live in a world where you're not only having to deal with the mechanics of running a construction company, you're also running a technology organization inside your business, and you're purchasing software on a pretty rapid time series, right? So if we move into the polling results for this, we can see we had 42 people say that they've made a major software purchase in the last year. Another 36% said 1 to 3 years. This is really interesting for me, given my day job working for a company that has historically produced construction ERP systems that take at least 2 to 3 years just to pick out which one you're going to buy and then install it. What we're seeing with our new product, Struxy, is we're seeing the construction industry start to embrace more of that best-in-breed approach, and we're starting to see the progressive construction companies iterate much more rapidly in their IT roadmap for the organization. They're going out and they're trying more software tools, and they're putting them into practice inside their business on a much more rapid time scale, because the business environment really demands that of you right now. The other thing that I love to talk about is the fact that being a technology-driven organization, even if you're a construction company, makes good business sense. And so one of the examples I love to throw out there is the difference between Amazon and Walmart. And if the internet didn't exist and we took Amazon and Walmart and we just kind of isolated them, if they were both brick and mortar businesses, and we were going to look at selling them, we would look at some of the traditional metrics in the finances of these two businesses, and we'd probably come up with a sales price for these two companies based on some multiple of trailing EBITDA, as opposed to some multiple of trailing 12-month revenue. And what I constantly find interesting about this example, and I've got the updated numbers, I just looked them up this morning, Walmart did $524 billion in revenue last year, and they brought in $14 billion in profit. But the price, if you wanted to buy Walmart right now, based on what their share price is, Walmart's market cap is $425 billion. Amazon's market cap is more than 3 times Walmart's current market cap. Amazon's market cap is $1.6 trillion. And Amazon did around half the revenue of Walmart, $280 billion, and they only turned $5 billion in profit, and that's over a 100% increase in their annual profits versus the prior year. And you got to ask yourself the question, okay, why is Amazon worth so much more money than Walmart? A lot of it is because the market loves a tech-powered growth engine. It's because they're viewed as the technology disruptor. The big news that dropped this morning that everybody in the technology industry is talking about is Salesforce deciding that they're going to buy Slack. They're going to buy Slack for $28 billion. Slack's trailing 12-month revenue is $800 million. And their EBITDA is far less. It's a negative number, right? Slack has been burning money. How many of you would love to have a valuation put on your construction company based on your trailing 12-month revenue, as opposed to some single digit or in some cases negative multiple of your trailing 12-month EBITDA? I think that the more you can embrace this idea that you are the disruptor in your industry, and the more you can prove that you're embracing that as a part of your strategic plan, the more financial benefit you're going to get for your company. And so I'm not talking about technology as this big ephemeral pie in the sky concept. I'm talking about the real dollars and cents impact of the technological disruption that's going to hit construction. Another thing that we like to talk about is, what are some of the things that you should be accounting for in your strat plan so that you're thinking about how you can leverage technology and turn yourself into a disruptor. In construction, we got a long list, and we're starting to see these things take root. Ryan and I could talk to you about some of the things that both of our businesses are doing together to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning. The fact that all of our systems are now connected through the internet or through a 5G cellular connection. The fact that, 90+% of your workforce has a smartphone in their pocket that has more computing power than a mainframe from 10 years ago and has an always-on internet connection is a potential game changer. And then when you get into the ability to leverage some of the tools that are available today to manipulate big data and mine actionable insight out of that data, to leverage predictive analytics, some of you would be downright shocked at how affordable all of that stuff has become in just the last 2 or 3 years. Another thing that I think we all need to get right with is the way technology gets adopted. This is a chart from Forbes. The New York Times has one that they update on a regular basis as well. And what I like to tell people is, if you think about it, it took telephones decades to get to 75% of the houses in the United States. It took smartphones less than 10 years. I keep reading the internet. I get my news feed every morning. The robots are coming for construction. A day doesn't go by where I don't see that article in my news feed. The latest one, there's a robot that can mud and tape drywall, right? It's not going to take 30 years for those robots to get adopted. It's going to take less than 10 years. The smart businesses are going to allocate resources to it. They're going to realize that we're never going back to the old way of doing things. We need to get right with the fact that this technology is now going to disrupt the way we need to think about the way work is being performed. And what's happening lately is when these technologies show up and they solve a very real problem, that technology becomes pervasive very rapidly for people, so fast that it can make your head spin. The other big one, I talked about it before, the smartphone thing. 5 years ago, I used to get pushback from construction company technology folks. All of my employees don't have an email address. All of my employees don't have a smartphone. All of my employees don't have the ability to get to the internet. So you can't do things like digitize their W-2 form, put their pay stubs online. We got to push paper. Well, that's changed. It's a very rare thing to run across anybody in the United States right now that doesn't have access to a smartphone or an internet connection that would have been considered speedy in this country 10 years ago. And, as the rate of these technological innovations get adopted continues to accelerate in pace, it's incumbent upon all of us to have a plan for it. And unfortunately, I promised 15 minutes ago that I was going to be the bad cop. When I zoom out and I look at the broader construction industry as a whole, we are behind the curve getting right with this. The construction industry has faced a productivity problem for a really long time. I've got a slide after this that talks about that McKinsey study from a couple of years back that talked about how staggering percentages of construction projects take longer than expected and cost more money than expected. And, the reason why we're behind is because the work we do is difficult and complicated and is constantly changing, right? We're dealing with an aging workforce. We deal with a lot of regulatory pressure. Material costs continue to rise. There continues to be talk about building codes getting more stringent. The people that own the properties that we build continue to get more demanding, right? We're seeing property owners want to see more as it relates to asset management, looking at their business as an asset in their portfolio. These are all things that we have to grapple with. And the question becomes, how do you find time to deal with having a strat plan in place for how you're going to deal with this technology disruption? What I would tell you, and Ryan's going to get into a real simple playbook that you can all leverage in another 5 minutes. What I would tell you is if you do not currently have dedicated brain space carved out to build a strategic technology plan for your organization. And I don't care how big your organization is. If you're an $800 million contractor like Lithco, you definitely have your technology strat plan, your technology roadmap. But if you're a $5 million residential general contractor, you should probably have, I mean, it might fit on a 3x5 index card, but you should have a plan for how you think about technology inside your business. And you probably should have had that plan a couple of years ago. So if you don't have one now, you're behind the curve and you need to get moving on pulling that stuff together. I'm going to ask one more polling question, and then I'm going to get into sort of the transition into Ryan's part of this presentation where we talk about how do we start to boil this down to brass tacks to turn it into something actionable. But first, how of your company owns that strat plan? Who's driving the decision-making regarding implementing new technology? And I realize for some of you, the answer for this question might be a little bit difficult because some of you might have multiple groups. Pick the one that seems to be dominating the conversation as it relates to those big technological decisions. And we'll give everybody a couple of seconds to fill this one out. And I can see right now already it's being populated pretty heavily with executives. And I know Ryan's going to have something to say about that in a couple of minutes. That's kind of interesting. We'll give everybody another 10, 15 seconds to put your answers in, and then we'll wrap the poll and we'll move on. All right, so 64% of your businesses have these big technology decisions being driven somewhat top-down from the executive team. And I realize executive is kind of a broad way to think about your business leaders. The fact that 8% is being driven by back office and IT and 27% is being driven by ops, I think that there's probably a better way to think about those technology decisions, to have those decisions be a little bit more inclusive. And I think that the fact that we haven't really figured this out in a way that consistently makes sense and is easy to adopt in this industry is one of the reasons why when you talk to these big consulting firms that are constantly looking at all of the different industries in the United States and how well they're embracing digital tools to disrupt themselves before somebody else comes in and disrupts them, construction is usually pretty close to the bottom of the list, which is fascinating to me. And Ryan's got a great example that he's going to share in a couple of minutes. If you broaden the way you think about technology, if it's not just digital tools, construction has typically been a first mover with technology, right? We've embraced automation on job sites. We've embraced mechanized labor. We were one of the first industries in the United States to really get that right and deploy it to the field. And yet here we are 50 years later, struggling to adopt the digital tools that are available to run a much more efficient business. The McKinsey report that said, hey, construction projects take too long, cost too much money, construction is one of the least digitized industries in the United States. They came up with this list of these 5 areas that we should all be thinking about as it relates to our technology strat plan for our construction company. And I think these are good ones for all of you to keep in mind. I'm not advocating that you build out some 50-page strat plan for each of these 5 topics, but I do think it's important that your business spend a little bit of time adopting a perspective or a point of view about each of these, right? Geolocation tools and better surveying for your job sites. How do you feel about that? Are you feeling like your business is being served by what you're currently using? Or is that an area where you think a big disruption is going to happen in the next 3 years? And do you want to get some boots on the ground thinking about where that disruption is going to come from so you're ahead of it when it happens? The whole idea of 5D BIM, right? It's a space that I'm borderline obsessed with being in charge of an ERP company because I feel like the financial accounting and the actual management of the project inside the building information model are still too disconnected in 2020. And, you know, as a software vendor to the market, we'll take responsibility for our role in that we need to be doing a better job connecting the job cost accounting, the financial project management, the workforce management back into that digital twin of your project so that it becomes a true digital twin that has your budget and timeline baked in there along with the evolution of the physical thing that you're building. The idea of digital collaboration and mobility. There's a reason why Mark Benioff at Salesforce paid $28 billion for Slack last night. It's because he really thinks that Slack is going to be a big part of Salesforce as a platform that allows people to collaborate through digital tools. The Internet of Things and advanced analytics, right? How many sensors are being deployed on your job sites? What are you doing with the data that those sensors are generating? You should have a point of view for that in your technology plan. And then this idea of future-proof design and construction, I think, is an important concept. And it's more the space of some of the guys that are on more of the architecture side and the property management side. But I think those of us that work in the trades need to have an opinion about it. And then the last thing that I'm really passionate about, and I think it goes back to that survey question of who's making the technology decisions. I think when I work with partners like Lithgow, CIOs like Ryan Hale, what I see them doing consistently that I don't see a lot of the industry doing is once they've got that technology roadmap, that strat plan technology chapter in place for their business, what are they doing to get the entire organization on board so that this isn't driven as an executive-led initiative or an operations-led initiative or an IT-led initiative? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, and Ryan's going to share with the audience some of the ways that Lithgow has been successful in actually making what I just described happen in the real world. So Ryan, with that, I'm going to shut up and kick it over to you.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. I'll start off with one of my favorite graphics, and I use this as an example fairly frequently because I think it sums up disruption nicely. So on the left side, we have our tried and true shovel, right? Where you're digging a 100, 300 linear feet trench. You can lay out your points. You can get all your buddies around. You can each grab a shovel and you can start digging. And probably about a month and a half later, you'll have that trench nice and dug. Then on the right side, the good old backhoe or excavator, yes, takes a little more planning, right? You gotta lease it, you gotta rent it, you gotta get it there, whatever it may be. Takes a little bit more caution. It's a dangerous piece of equipment to operate versus that handy shovel. Takes a little bit different skill set to operate. Can be more expensive up front. All of those things are absolutely true, I think. But the interesting thing is, but the opportunity to be much more efficient and to save money in the quote unquote long run is significant. And at this stage, if you ask someone on this call, the 100 plus people on this call, who would prefer to dig the trench of 300 linear feet with the shovel versus the backhoe, I'm pretty sure every single one of us would say the backhoe, right? And that's where we are. That's what we've accepted as the new reality. To Bill's point earlier, we're not going back, right? Technology is the same exact example here, right? Who's going to use the shovel when they could use the backhoe? Now, we've got to do all those things to get there. We've got to plan. We've got to think about what other resources we're going to need. We got to bring people along. We probably got to retrain them. But I think that's the opportunity that lies in front of the construction industry when it comes to digital transformation, when it comes to new technology adoption. And obviously, of the poll earlier says that, hey, look, a lot of us are on that journey. And I bet if we were to do that poll 4 years ago, it would look significantly different. So I think that's exciting. I think it's encouraging. But I think this graphic sums it up and demonstrates exactly where we can go. In 5 or 10 years from now, we look back and say, why did we ever do it that way? Why did we ever do it with paper? Why did we ever print all that stuff out? Why didn't we ever put this in the hands of the people doing the work so they can make real-time decisions? I think that's the inflection point that we're at. Let's go to the next slide here. So how do we get there, right? You can call this a blueprint. You can call it kind of your tenets for transformation. But to me, before you get to step by step, you have to think about what are those core things that I'm going to build my technology transformation on, my digital transformation on, my technology roadmap on. What are those items? And for me and for Lithgow, it's kind of come down to 6 key things that every time we're challenging ourselves, every time we're brainstorming, every time we're going back to our roadmap and we're challenging what's on the roadmap or if we're going to move it around here or there. These are the things that are in the back of our mind. And these are the things that we never want to waver on. We never want to change. We want to build upon these, truly kind of the foundation of our building or the foundation of our house, right? So I'll start in the bottom left corner, and this thing kind of honeycombs its way over to successful transformation. But ultimately, it's, to me, and for Lithgow, it starts with getting the pulse of the organization. There's a lot of cool technology out there. There's a lot of cool things to adopt. But if we're not identifying pain points that then we're going to turn around and apply the technology to, then what are we really solving for? So those folks earlier, and I think it was 27% of folks earlier said operations are the ones that drive the decision making. I think those folks are 100% correct. If we don't understand how we're making money, and I'm guessing most folks on this phone, you make money by putting work in place out in the field somewhere. If you don't understand what's going on out there in the field, and you don't understand how folks are doing their day-to-day job, and you don't understand how they could be more efficient or effective if they had different tools or technologies to do their job, then I think you're missing the first big key. You've got to get that pulse of the organization. You've got to understand what practitioners that are living and breathing the work day to day, that are making the company money day to day, what they're feeling. And then and only then can you as a technologist or you that manage technologists, can you go back and put together a solution to meet those needs of those folks and improve the day-to-day interactions they have with their role and with their work. I think the second thing for us is, let's not forget, boys, we build buildings here. Yes, we are trying to find disruptive technology. Yes, we're trying to put technology in places to make us more effective and efficient. But that doesn't mean we're just going out and grabbing the new latest and greatest technology and hand jamming it into a spot because we think it's cool or we think it'll work. At the end of the day, we build buildings, and we can't lose sight of that. We're not a technology company. Now, over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years, technology has become more and more in the drivetrain of Lithgow. Getting information and better data flow for better decision making is something that we continue to work on every day, and we've made big strides in the past few years. But at the end of the day, we're not a technology company. We're not Slack or Salesforce, like Bill mentioned earlier. We build buildings. You know, one of the biggest, as we started thinking through our transformation and going down our digital transformation journey 4 years ago or so, one of the largest things that we noticed right off the bat is we had a lot of us versus them. Those that sat in an office or in the back office those are the shared service people, and those people out there are the operations people. And it didn't happen intentionally, just over time, there'd become this cultural divide. And the reason it mattered for my team and I is, as an IT team, at that stage, a lot of it was, oh, those IT guys are to blame. They're not getting us what we need. Their technology never works properly. Well, maybe, but at the same time, it's not just us, the technology people, putting technology in place. It's you, the operations people, helping us understand the requirements. It's you, the operations people, allowing us into your world so that we can figure out how to best solve it. And we together need to solve it. And 4 years ago, we made a very, very conscious effort to getting away from the term shared service, away from the terms back office. We have never used the term corporate, but if we did, I would put it in that bucket. And it's truly a we thing at this stage. And that's how we think about it. That we're all on the same team. The technology guys and the business guys and the operations guys are all pulling for the same thing, and that's a solution that makes everyone's life better. And a critical tenet. Look, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And I think what Bill mentioned earlier with technology adoption and the rate that it's being adopted, and he mentioned that the cell phone, reaching 80% or whatever it was in under 10 years. And I think we all know that's just going to continue to accelerate. But at the same time, don't forget, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not about how much you can pack in the shortest amount of time. It's about what we are going to implement. Let's do it right. Because if we do it right, the benefit that we'll get, assuming we choose the right thing, and we can kind of get to that here on the next slide in the recipe, the benefit we're going to get from it is going to far outweigh the amount of work we put into it. And if that means it takes more time, then so be it. Let's get it right. So if we don't get it right up front, we're going to spend a lot more time reworking stuff that didn't work. We're going to spend a lot more time repairing, quote unquote, IT's reputation. And we're going to spend a lot more time managing frustrated people and dealing with change management issues than if we just took more time up front to get it right in the first place. So for us, it's not about how many things we implement. It's about how few things we implement correctly. Keep the long focus in mind. It's interesting, right? I think on this 37 minutes of call so far, we've mentioned technology, IT, digital transformation, and a bunch of other terms that are associated with those three. And at the end of the day, the interesting part is really digital transformation isn't about IT. It's about what are our processes, where are our processes broken down, or maybe where they're non-existent. How do our people interact with those? How do our roles interact with those processes and those process steps? How does the data and information availability look at each of those process steps? And then when you lay all that out, okay, well, I guess then we can go in and we can figure out how to make the process more efficient. We can think about how we would do that, or what the golden state, the perfect state would look like. We can think about how our roles would better interact with that new process or that to-be state. We can think about how information should flow through that to-be state, through those processes, to those people, so they can make the right decisions at the right time. Oh, and by the way, then IT comes into play, and we can actually apply some technology. But I think it's truly in that order. It's process, it's people, it's information flow, and then it happens to be technology that enables that. And I think we've probably all heard the term or the metaphor, the saying, if you put IT on top of a bad process, all you've really done is accelerate the bad process, right? You have a faster mess that you now have to deal with. So although, yes, digital transformation, yes, technology adoption, yes, all that stuff, really at the end of the day, it's really not about technology at all. That's just the enabler at the end. And then, of course, as you're doing this, don't mess it up. Nothing really more to say there, right? Be cautious, be mindful, be planful. And if you think there's significant risk in what you're trying to do, it probably isn't worth it, or you haven't truly thought through all the variables and how to mitigate them. So whatever you do, don't mess it up. So if those are kind of the core tenets of the way we think, those unwavering things that we should never sacrifice, we should never change, we should always remember that everything else is built upon. How do we get there? What are some of the more tangible steps? What are some of the things that you have to do to enable it? And I could probably talk for 30 minutes on each of these items, but I'm gonna hit them relatively quickly. I hit on it earlier. It's get out to the people doing the work. It's get out in the field and understand how they're doing the work. It may be sitting with the folks in AP or AR or payroll and understanding how they do what they do and how that connects to the people doing the work. It's understanding how people interact with processes, with current technology, with current reports and data and information, and understand the pain points. And collect those pain points, pull them together, understand enough of them to say, look, if we solve that pain point, we could get this much benefit. and it would probably roughly take this much work. Understand, hey, if this is something we want to go attack, and we believe that there's a technology solution there that could attack it, who's going to help me drive it? Because it's not IT. It's not an IT thing. Who from the business? Who from operations? Who is going to help me drive this initiative so A, it's adopted easier, and B, that we know at the end of this, we're not just going to put something in place that's not going to be useful or used. So who's my group of people that are going to help me solve these pain points? Then once you have all these pain points laid out in front of you, 10, 15, 20, 100, 400, whatever the number is, how am I going to prioritize them? Because again, can't do them all at once. Maybe you can eventually, right? Maybe you get to all of them eventually. That's the marathon, not a sprint piece. But you certainly can at first. And more importantly, when you start down this digital transformation, technology adoption exercise, roadmap, or if you're just on it and trying to pick up momentum, the last thing you can do is have a dud, right? You don't have that luxury. So we really have to understand what's going to be important, what needs to be sequenced before the other. We really have to prioritize and develop that technology roadmap. Now, our roadmap goes out 3 years. That may make sense for us. It may need to be shorter or longer for you. That's one of those organizational things. But getting that roadmap out there and in front of folks and getting some buy-in as to if we do these 1, 2, 3 things now, it will yield us this. And then it will make sense to do these next 2 or 3 things, and that will yield us that. And then the next 2 and the next 2 or whatever it may be. It's extremely important to get that graphic in front of folks and get buy-in on it. Because really, that's how you're going to plan your next 1, 2, 3 years. That's how, if you have that buy-in, that's how you're going to keep coming back as new things come up, and you're going to help reprioritize as new technology comes about, new pain points come about, a pandemic comes about, right? It's having that roadmap and continually coming back and refreshing that roadmap becomes absolutely critical. But it starts with pain points that are prioritized and end up on some piece of paper. And probably most importantly, that piece of paper doesn't just become a laminated coaster on everyone's desk. It's actually used and it's referenced every month or 2 months or quarter or whatever cadence makes sense for you. The third bullet there I think is extremely important, and I've alluded to it a number of times already. But once you have that roadmap and you're choosing the initiatives to address, you really, really need to have 2 people leading that initiative. And the way we look at it is 1 IT person, 1 business person, or 1 IT person, 1 operations person. The IT folks should never be alone, because then it becomes a technology initiative and not something that's going to be easily adopted. Start with the process. Hammer this over and over and over. Okay, now we're going to go attack this pain point. Okay, great. What's the current process? Okay, great. What do we want that process to be? Okay, great. Who interacts with it? Who needs to interact with it? What's the current information flow? Start there. Lay the technology on top of it. The biggest key when we started is being 100% transparent. Because if you're in an organization that isn't used to adopting new technologies, well, then it's very easy for folks to not understand how the adoption of new technologies works. All of the detailed steps behind it. You've got to configure stuff. You've got to test stuff. You've got to pilot stuff. You have to train stuff, and then you fully implement stuff. If you haven't been through that before, there's a lot of gotchas in there. And if it's a black hole to these outside observers, you're not doing yourselves any favor. So be transparent. Be open. Hey, this is what it's going to look like. We're not going to get it all perfect. And by the way, we're not going to get it all perfect. I'm going to raise my hand and tell you that we're not getting it perfect and that the initial timeline isn't going to work, or it's only going to work if we can bring some other resources, et cetera, et cetera. Or I'm going to need help from you and you and you at this stage to help us overcome this risk. That's why that guiding coalition up top is so important. And then to help do that, to break down the barriers, to prepare the organization for adoption, communicate, communicate, communicate. Can't say enough. Communicate to any stakeholder that's going to be impacted and try to make that communication impactful to them. And then, of course, once it's successful, don't miss the opportunity to broadcast some success. So we've been on this journey for 3 or 4 years now, as I mentioned. I could fill this slide up with probably 50 lessons learned, and I'm happy to share those with folks in other meetings. But at the end of the day, I think these are the 6 most impactful. First off, there is no right answer to any of this. The right answer is the answer that makes the most sense for your organization. And if you follow that slide earlier, getting the pain points that your organization is wrestling with and figuring out what that means to you and to your organization is the biggest key. Look, I get it. Finding pain points, building guiding coalitions, prioritizing, resourcing takes time. It takes effort. Matter of fact, it takes a lot more effort up front. For us, we kind of roughly calculated that at times this takes 3 times longer than maybe it should. But at the end of the day, it makes implementation a lot easier. So spend the time up front to get it right in the back. I mentioned this earlier. I'm not going to talk on it too much here. Pair a technology person with a business or an operations person with one common goal so that everyone is connected and everyone's pulling in the same direction. We win as a team, we lose the team. There's going to be a lot of opinions and theories. There's going to be a lot of people that are naysayers of what we're doing. There's going to be a lot of people that say, nope, this is my tried and true shovel. That backhoe, that excavator is too complicated. That'll never work. Absolutely. But don't get distracted by it. Drive the conversation back to the process and how the process is going to get better, how data and information flow is going to get better, how this system can enable that. If they think, well, yeah, of course, you can give me that. Of course, I'd rather have that information daily versus weekly. Okay. All right. Well, right along with us here because that's where we're going. Rewards the team for elevating risk when they do. And reward them for doing it as early as possible. Even if those risks don't come to fruition, even if you don't act on them all, that's that transparency piece. And that, to me, is one of the biggest issues with technology implementation. If it looks like an IT project and no one can peer through and understand what's going on, big problems are ahead. So make sure the teams feel comfortable and can raise their hand when there's issues. And at the end of the day, this goes to that last bullet on the last slide, the business won't do what it doesn't understand. So you've got to make it crystal clear to them. We've got to take it out of technology speak. We've got to put it in layman speak and the average person speak. We can't talk bits and bytes to people. We need to talk outcomes, and we need to talk about outcomes in their language. Bill, that's all I had. I would hand it back to you.
Yeah, I think before we get into questions, just a real quick shameless plug. We've prepared some handout materials for this webinar, and there's a really good in-depth case study on the project that my company, Penta and Struxy, and Ryan's company, Lithco, worked together on. We jointly developed a labor productivity tool that's deployed on their job sites, and we took this approach. Right? We worked together, and we actually took Ryan's 2 in the box concept and extended it where our 2 companies were the 2 in the box as well. So if you're looking for even more information on how the rubber meets the road with some of the things Ryan just shared, that case study is a really good real world example that kind of takes you through it step by step. So with that, we'll throw it back to Scott, do some questions.
Thank you, Bill and Ryan. This was a really great presentation. Before we have our presenters address some questions that were submitted during the program, I want to remind our viewers that we'd love their feedback on our webinar survey to help improve our programs, which is available on your screen now, or it can be filled out at the conclusion of the webinar. If you have a question and you haven't submitted it yet, now would be a good time. Just simply type it into the Ask Question box on your console, and hopefully we'll have the time to field it. So we've got a few interesting questions, and I'll start with this one, and I'm going to direct it, Bill, to you. This viewer is curious about, what you think is the most important or impactful of the 5 big ideas driving disruption.
Yeah, I mean, my response to this is obviously going to be colored by my day job, which is working for a company that makes construction productivity software. I really think that we're well past the point where everybody should be embracing getting more dimensions into your digital twin of your project, right? So, Penta as a software company has been around since 1968, if you could believe that. And way back in 1968, some smart people had the idea that, man, we could probably run more productive construction projects if we used computers to help us. And so I think the logical extension of that, like here we are 50 some odd years later, and we're still struggling with this. I think everybody should be really embracing the fact that you should be able to have a digitized system in place that gives you something pretty darn close to real time, a window into what's happening on all your projects, both from a productivity standpoint, but also from a financial and timeline standpoint.
Thank you. Ryan, do you want to add anything to that from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not really sure that I could pick one. I think they all have their place if they are leveraged properly. And I think a lot of that depends on where the business is, what the business does. For us, the 5D building information piece that Bill spoke to earlier in the call and then just spoke to is a big deal. How can we get plans, specs, schedules aligned to budget and actual so that we truly know where we are every day and we can make adjustments to our plan? That's a really, really big deal. For us, advanced analytics, which is the fourth one down, really, really big deal. We're spending a lot of time getting more timely, accurate information into the hands of the folks building buildings, making decisions. And we're starting to become a bit predictive, saying, okay, if the data is showing us that to date, what is that going to mean at the end of the project, or what have you, right? It's extremely important to us. So to me, those two are the biggest ones on there. But at the end of the day, right? I mean, I can also go down the list, and yes, future-proof design. That's also a big deal as materials change and as for us new slab systems come out. So I think it depends on where you are. I think it all goes back to that same recipe. Where are your current pain points? Where do you think your future pain points are going to be? Prioritize them, figure out how to attack them as an organization.
Excellent. Thank you. Another viewer asked kind of the interesting question is we're talking about technology advancing so fast. Do either of you have a viewpoint on how fast technology becomes obsolete?
I'm on mute,
sure,
and I'm frustratedly laughing. So Ryan, while I gather myself, why don't you answer that question?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a view on how quickly it becomes obsolete, other than, yes, it is becoming more obsolete more quickly. To me, as a technology guy, or a guy responsible for technology for a relatively large concrete construction firm, I know it's going to become obsolete relatively quickly. So the vendors and the products that I end up picking to solve these pain points becomes a much bigger worry of mine versus how quickly the technology is going to advance itself. I feel that if we pick the right solutions that have the right architecture in the background and the right vendors that are managing, that are building, that are enhancing those solutions, then as technology changes, we've left ourselves with enough wiggle room to go to those strategic vendors and say, hey, looks what's coming down the pike. What are you guys doing about it? Okay, well, why don't we partner on that? Because that sounds like a great idea. Or I haven't locked myself into a massive contract with one of the huge vendors in this space because their technology is old and slow and difficult to plug into. I want to make sure that I'm partnering with vendors that are opening up their databases and sharing information and aren't afraid of that. So if you do those kind of things, it almost hardly matters how quickly technology changes, because then you've given yourselves the variability or the leeway to change with it to some extent.
Yeah, and I think my view on that's very similar to Ryan's, is that, the reason why I was kind of chuckling to myself over here is I remember years ago somebody asked me to come up with a predictive model for the macro economy, and my response was, if I had access to that crystal ball, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be swimming around in my vault full of gold coins. And so I don't think there's an easy or accurate way to look at potential obsolescence of a given technology platform. Instead, what I think you need to do is constantly ask yourself, with the tools that you currently have available, have you outgrown them? Have they been replaced by something better? Is this a backhoe, or is it a shovel, or is it a GPS connected backhoe? And can I get productivity gains by making that upgrade? And it really does need to be decisions that are made continuously on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you. Another viewer asked, I'm going to reframe this question. Do you think that the increasing demands of project owners is a function that they realize that productivity is on the decline?
From my perspective, kind of being involved, but not necessarily being a link in the value chain, I think what has happened in construction over time is we do have a very long value chain, right? When you think about the beginning of a project where some developer decides, I want to turn that hole in the ground into a building, all the way out to the very last, most specialized subcontractor completing their work and turning it over, there's a lot of links in that chain. And I think the frustration on the part of a lot of owners, when I talk to them anyway, is that they feel like the lack of digitization and the fact that everybody inside that value chain is kind of at war with each other on any given day, it's not transparent to them. And I think what I'm seeing is they're going to the opposite end of the chain from where they started the project, and they're saying, I want every last bit of detail down to within a gnat's eyelash when you turn this thing over to me, because I don't trust anything that happened from the time I started this project to the time it was completed, because it's not transparent to me. It's somewhat opaque. And I'm sure, Ryan, you have a different view of that from inside the value chain.
Well, no, I mean, I think your transparency thing there is key, right? And I think the opportunity that lies in front of us as tools do become more interconnected, or tools allow us to interconnect tools, extract the data from these 5 sources, join it together here, present it better there, whatever it may be. I do think that begins to help. I think that technology being available can really, really be a benefit to folks in our case, let's say, right, where we may have a general contractor asking for information on this phase of work or whatever it may be. We have the opportunity to provide them more timely and accurate information as well, just as we do our own people. And then I think just giving them transparency creates a different conversation with them and allows us to manage that relationship better, providing them what they want in a more timely manner. And ultimately, hopefully, then once they know it's there, then they're not nearly as concerned about it, and a bunch of those additional requirements kind of go away.
We have time for one more question. And Bill, I think this one is directed to you, because the viewer is asking, what are large projects as defined by the McKinsey survey that you referenced?
Yeah, I mean, that McKinsey survey, it came out a few years ago. I've been at construction technology conferences where it was referenced as the report in very ominous terms. And really what it is, it's large projects from construction companies that they survey. And so what I would say is don't focus on the specifics, right? Because the 2 percentages shared in that report are very round numbers. You see 80% and 20%. I think it's more about the spirit of the statement. And I think you need to ask yourself, okay, is what's in this McKinsey paper applying to my company? Do you find yourself frustrated with how often projects run over time and over budget? Then what's in that McKinsey paper probably applies to the way you should be thinking about your business. So I don't have a good answer for the detailed, what was their survey methodology for getting that data, but I do happen to agree with the spirit in which they provided the information.
Great. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. Please join me in thanking Bill Wagner and Ryan Hale, as well as our sponsor, Struxy, powered by Penta Technology. If you have any additional questions or comments that didn't get aired, don't hesitate to share that question on the Email Us button on the console, and we'll share those with Bill and Ryan, and they'll respond directly to you. Please visit enr.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation to share with your colleagues, as well as information about our upcoming events. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for our webinar, A New Approach Using Prefabrication Methods and Technologies to Transform Business Models, which will air at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope you found this webinar to have been a good investment of your time today. Thank you, and have a great day.